Hey friends, and welcome back to Path of Exile for one more video. So yesterday we posted our league starting plans, and the plan mostly hasn't changed. We're going Corrupting Cry Elementalist. I still believe the Elementalist is possibly the best ascendancy for physical damage over time skills, but we might be modifying our plans a bit based on the new gem information. So I posted the league starter yesterday and then went over to Path of Exile to see a brand new announcement, which I really wasn't expecting to be amazed by. There are some really cool skills here, and I've liked what I've seen, but nothing was really calling out to me until I read through all of these. So I'm going to go through them really quickly, and then we're going to dive into one in particular that might actually be most of what I use through the entire league. So first up we have Chain Hook of Tarthus, which seems to be an interesting take on the way Chain Hook works. So the way this is going to work is you throw out chains and they attach up to 9 targets, and then when they break they deal damage. Now it's unclear to me if you can break the chains by exceeding the cap, or if you have to get out of range for the chains to break. So it's really kind of something we're just going to have to play around with when we get in game. But it's a really interesting take on a chain hook. Next up is Heavy Strike of Tarthus, which is increases in reductions to spell damage, also apply to attack damage for this skill at 170% of their value. This means that the 20% skill effect is increasing the increase in reduction to spell damage effectiveness. So basically we have the Crown of Eyes modifier on Heavy Strike, but it can be modified. I'm not a huge fan of Heavy Strike, but it might be a really good angle for a single target. Next up is Sunder of Tarthus, and this looks really fun to me. I think this is going to be a really interesting way to play Sunder. I don't know if it's going to measure up, but I think it at least should be interesting and may actually be a ton of fun. So the way this one works is you slam the ground and it creates the regular wave that Sunder does. So the short version for Sunder is it effectively has a chain built in. So the wave can restart 2 times, which means it should be able to chain to enemies after hitting the first. I think this is going to be a really cool Sunder, and it depends on how extreme the chaining can be as to whether or not this is going to be a ton of fun or kind of just a meme. Bladefall of Tarthus is the one I'm going to talk about later. But effectively, this is Bladefall that is centered on you, that has a cost per second in mana, and is continuously firing Bladefalls every 0.7 seconds at up to 5 enemies around you. Or at least that's the way I read it. This is one I want to talk about in a minute, so I'm not going to go too deep on this one. So yeah. Blast Rain of Tarthus looks like a pretty significant ignite ability, so you fire 1 arrow only instead of a bunch of arrows with Blast Rain, and that 1 arrow is going to make a pretty significant explosion and deal fire damage over time on the ground, and also I believe have the attack damage portion, but the effectiveness of added damage isn't huge or enormous, so I don't know how good ignite is going to be on the attack itself, because usually I feel like you want effectiveness of added damage, but I'm not an expert on ignite builds, so I don't know. Siege Ballista of Tarthus is the one we've seen. It is a circle of siege ballistas. It's actually the one pictured right here. They pop up, fire once, and then go away. I think it's got some potential, but I really don't know. It'll be interesting to see what people cook up for this. Spectral Helix of Tarthus and Spectral Throw of Tarthus I'm going to cover at the same time. Effectively, they are a trap version of both of these skills, so they might be an interesting new way to play both of these skills. Spectral Shield Throw of Tarthus is another one that we've seen before. You throw out the shield and it stays in place and fires shards all around itself until it runs out of shards. Now, something that I think is odd here is normally I would want more projectiles, but this skill, the way projectile adding works, is it adds more shards to the already existing 23 projectiles. And so I feel like something like GMP doesn't really do a whole lot, because GMP is going to add only a couple more, and it's not going to be super effective to the overall damage of the build. So I'm not sure how to scale this one outside of just making a really good shield. Next up is Dark Pact of the Tarthus. I'm not sure how I would want to approach this skill, and it's just because of how significant the life cost is on it. So because it's sacrificing 50% of your life, there's no real way for you to mitigate that life. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to sacrifice a lot of life. That way you get a lot of base chaos damage, but at the same time, that means that you don't want to cast too quickly, because you have to be able to recover that 50%. So I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I think this is going to have some cool applications, but I'm not sure how I feel about it. Stormcall of Tarthus is one that we've seen before, and it is effectively a fizz damage over time spell, which kind of operates like Val Reap, but a lesser version. I'm not sure how good this is going to be, but it will be an interesting new thing to play with. Wave of Conviction of Tarthus seems like a really cool ability. The limitation of one wave being active at a time is a pretty significant limitation, but that really just makes me want to do something like Ignite instead of a regular damage build. And I think if you really invest into duration, you might be able to get a pretty enormous screen coverage on this ability. That's one other thing to note here, is that while this is an AoE skill, it doesn't have a base AoE, it has a base duration, and it seems to travel outward until the duration has expired and then travel back inwards. So rather than scaling just the AoE, what you would scale is the duration to make the AoE bigger. And then last up is the support that we know we're getting, which is focused channeling support. You get more damage while you're channeling, up to a maximum of 60% more, and it also adds more cost per second, up to a maximum of 100%. Now, down below they also have all of the updated skills that were announced in the patch notes, along with some extra little details for all of those. But for now, I really want to focus in on Bladefall of Tarthus. So the reason I'm focused in on this so hard is because it seems like Bladefall of Tarthus is a buff, or almost like a buff, where you activate it and it just stays on. So kind of like you do with RF. RF just takes a portion of your life every second. This seems like it's going to do a similar thing, but it's going to be mana per second. And so if that is the way it works, then we have an amazing new tool for zero button builds, as long as we can maintain the mana cost. Now, the mana cost is pretty significant. 5% per second is just the base mana cost. So anything that we're adding on top of that is going to make it cost more. Now, something I've been thinking about is, I think I can use this on our Corrupting Cry build. And it's an interesting kind of setup. So the first thing to note is 5% of mana per second is something that you want to scale a lot of times if this is your main ability. If this isn't your main ability, then maybe it doesn't matter. But more mana means increased volley frequency, which is going to be pretty important for builds that are main damage Bladefall. But, like I said, 0.7 seconds is fine if this isn't your main source of damage. So what I'm thinking about doing here is having a Bladefall Corrupting Fever adaptation of our build. And the reason this might work is 5% of mana per second without any supports isn't really that bad, especially if you're not investing hard into mana. So really quickly, we can pull up our POP, and I've kind of adjusted it, but you can see right here we have 900 total mana at this point. Right, so let's say we have 900 mana. So 900 mana times 0.05 for the 5% is 45 mana, and then we can add in a single support for our convenience, maybe something like increased area of effect, which is a 130% multiplier on mana cost. That brings our mana cost up to 58.5 every second. Now, that is a significant mana investment, right? That's a lot of mana cost. But if most of your build is not using mana, or if you've got your mana recovery to a point where you are comfortable with it, something that you might be able to do is use a lightning golem. Lightning golems at level 20 are going to give 18 mana regen per second. If you are going with the new elementalist, 18 times 3 is 54 mana per second, which is almost enough on its own to cover the 58 mana cost per second of Bladefall of Tarthus with an increased AoE support. So, what we're planning on possibly doing, and this is going to depend on how it feels and if I can get it to work, and most importantly, if I can get the amount of skill gems to work, is maybe switching over from Corrupting Cry to Corrupting Fever. Now, Corrupting Fever is harder to scale early, but will scale further. So, Corrupting Fever relies on active skill level gems, or active skill level, where Corrupting Cry is a support gem, and it relies a ton on skill level, or on the support level, but it relies on it a lot less for the early damage. Alright, so looking at Corrupting Cry, you can see what the damage is at level 20. So going over here to level 20, we have 601 physical DPS. That is the base damage that we're scaling with Corrupting Cry. Corrupting Fever, on the other hand, has a base damage at level 20 of 335. So we almost get double damage from Corrupting Cry, but we are going to be able to scale Corrupting Fever further into the higher levels. Another benefit of using Corrupting Fever over Corrupting Cry and using the new Bladefall is that we can actually convert this build into a 0-button build. We couldn't do that before because Corrupting Cry and auto exertion support do not work together. Because Corrupting Cry has a life conversion and a 1000% mana multiplier, it is not possible to use Corrupting Cry on a Warcry with auto exertion. It's just not feasible in a build. So this might be another angle for us to get to a 0-button physical damage over time build. So this might be an angle we take. I shouldn't be surprised that I released a video and immediately my plans might have changed, but we'll see how it goes in League Start. We would still have to find the Bladefall gem, and we would still need to test around and see if we can automate the upkeep of Corrupting Fever. Alright, so what does this do to our tree if we end up doing this? Well, all we're going to do if we end up switching over to Corrupting Fever is we're going to drop this Warcry node right here, pick up this physical damage right here, and that's kind of all we need to do. The other thing we can do is we can pick up a replica Dragonfang, which we don't have here, but that's something that we could invest into, and that'll give us 3 extra gem levels on our Corrupting Fever. The build is entirely unchanged. I just might pivot into a Corrupting Fever because I really want to use this new Bladefall. I cannot wait for League Start tomorrow. I am so incredibly hyped to try out this new skill in basically every ascendancy that I can think of. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow on League Start.